Happy to see some familiar faces from Tango and other things. So, as Nancy said, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions as I go. My degree is in kinesiology. I'm a PhD doctor. I'm not a clinician, so I teach in our occupational therapy program, but I'm not an occupational therapist. And a lot of work that I've done has dealt with physical therapy. I'm also not a physical therapist. So you can also add neurologist, internologist. I'm not any of those things. So I'm just me. But tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about exercise, things that we know, how it affects the brain, Parkinson's disease, what kind of exercise is the best is a question we commonly get. So we'll dive into all of those things, and as Nancy said, as we go through, if you have questions, please let me know. Very quickly, just so you know the things that shape the decisions that I make, this is a list of the grants that fund the work that we're going to talk about tonight. Nothing, no drug companies or anything like that fund any of my work. But if we're really going to talk about disclosures of interest, I also want to give you the full story and my biases. So my mother-in-law is on the right. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 2 years before I met my husband. She is the beta test, if you will, for the in-home cycling project that I'm going to talk about later. She lives in very rural Illinois. She's an hour and a half away from St. Louis. The nearest hospital, I think, is 30 minutes away. So that's my mother-in-law, and on the other side of the family, this is my grandmother, who in 2002, when I published my first paper on Parkinson's disease, I printed her out a copy to take to my grandmother so she could be proud of me, and she said, "This is Parkinson's?" So those are my backgrounds as well. These are the people who, everything that we do, that's what's in my mind. Every time that we publish a study on exercise or try to help people with PD, it's not just a group of people that I've never met before. It's many of you who I have met before and many people who are very close to me. And beyond that, these are my two little men. So obviously we haven't done enough and we've failed to find a cure for PD thus far. That should be the driving force going forward, right? We may have failed you, likely we failed my generation, but if we can keep pushing, and if we can keep understanding, and if we can keep figuring out what the brain does and how it changes and how to affect it, hopefully these guys will have no idea what it means. So those are my real biases, those are the things that affect what I do. So really quickly, so I understand who you are, how many people here are currently doing something that you would label as exercise? Yeah, that's that. Nicely done. That's great. You guys are a very unique population, Madison in general. The amount of exercise and physical activity related things that Madison has available is outstanding. I came here from St. Louis, which also has a great Parkinson's disease group, but it's nothing like what we have here. For physical activity, for a variety of things. If you don't like Tango, go do boxing. And if you don't like boxing, then row. It's very impressive. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, so this is just the 30-second jump into what we're going to really talk about. So what do we do to treat Parkinson's disease? Everybody knows. Pharmacology, we give you levodopa medication. We hope that it works. We can also do deep brain stimulation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Taking that to the next level, in addition to those things, or in parallel with those things, we can also look at things like occupational therapy. So occupational therapists help you do the things that you do every day. And they help you navigate your bathroom or kitchen more safely. Occupational therapy helps you do the stuff that matters to you. Physical therapy helps you get back some of those physical things that have been lost. Improve things such as range of motion and strength, and help you get your body in the best shape that it can be in. Speech, many of you are familiar with the LOUD program. We know that Parkinson's disease helps to, or doesn't help to, Parkinson's disease attenuates the speech, so things get quieter, softer, more slurred together. It's a bad demonstration when you have a microphone on. So speech specifically can help to address those components. And then there used to be a question mark by this, but we used to say we think that maybe exercise can add and help do all of those things. The truth is we now know that exercise can help do all of those things. Doing something like tango dancing, you have to talk. You have to engage with the person that you're dancing with or partnered with. Doing something like boxing, hopefully you're talking or things are gonna go bad quickly. Even things like just leaving your house require you to talk, require you to use your voice. So being active helps to engage that. It helps you to move, which is the physical therapy end of things. It helps you to stay engaged in the community, which is the occupational end of things. So all of those pieces, exercise can directly affect without going to the therapist. So what are the benefits? First and foremost, I want to make sure that it's very clear that I'm by no means advertising exercise as a replacement for your medication, because it is not. And in fact, what we know is that if you can get your medication to be properly balanced, if you can get your medication to be in its optimal place, then you're most likely to see the maximum benefits of that exercise. The worst thing that can happen is that you start to do an exercise program, you start to feel a little bit better and feel as though that exercise is replacing your medication. That's not what it does. And in fact, if you look at the neural things that are changing with regard to exercise, they are quite different than the mode that medication affects your brain. So it's two parallel lines, we think. We think one highlights the other. We know that if your medication is not well managed, exercise, in fact, will not be as beneficial. So these are two parallel tracks, not exclusive of each other. So if you asked me to come give this talk 5 years ago, there would be a few things that we could point to that we think exercise does for Parkinson's disease or movement disorders in general. Now, if we really went through each individual study, we would be here long past the night, just listing off studies that have been done. So just to name a few, we know that while yes, you need to stay on your medication and your medication needs to be properly managed, we know that, as you know, your medication will continue to need to be upregulated. It turns out that exercise can help you stay at each of those levels slightly longer when the exercise is beneficial in the toward the symptoms of your Parkinson's disease. We know that exercise specifically actually addresses some of the symptoms that go with PD. So we see decreased rigidity. The tremor, generally speaking, isn't affected, but we see decreased falls, improved gait, increased balance. We also see improvements in speech. We see less depression. We see improved cognitive scores in some measures. And to some extent, most importantly, depending on the type of exercise that you're doing, we also see decreased falls, which, as you know, in many cases can be one of the very debilitating things that can occur with PD. But as it turns out, the effects of exercise are relatively specific to the type of exercise that you do. This isn't true in the very beginning. So if right now you are not physically active, just starting to be physically active is a wonderful thing, and you will see general benefits from that. But as you continue that and try to maintain your level of physical activity, if what it is that you want to see is an increase in endurance, right now you get tired walking from here to the doorway, then you really need to focus your exercise on endurance type of activities. If what you want to see is an increase in strength, you found that as you become less physically active, you're just not able to do those things that you used to do easily, then you really need to focus on strength. So exercise is targeted, and we know that those benefits directly go to the type of exercise that you're doing. We also know, and this is the real bummer of the whole deal, once you stop exercising, it all goes away. Slowly but surely over time, but it all goes away. So you don't get to do 8 weeks of tango dancing, feel better from that, take longer strides, be generally more balanced, have better posture, and then that just sticks for the next 20 years. When you stop, all of those gains go away. Yes, sir?
I've heard that you can lose, I believe, 5% of your muscle strength in a week, but you can only gain in a week 1% back.
I think the 5% is a little steep. I could be wrong. But it is true that it goes away faster than you get it back. The good news to a certain extent is if you are physically active and you take some time off and you try to return, you'll come back faster than if you were never physically active. But you do absolutely lose it faster than you get it back, which should hope to just motivate you to stay active, right? The longer you take off, the more time it's gonna take you to get back to where you were. Sorry, say that again?
If you're sick a long time, that's a big calorie.
It completely and totally is, yes. And there are things, even if you're sick and you can't participate at the same level that you were, one of the common misconceptions is if I can't, so I'm walking 15,000 steps a day. And now I'm really not feeling well, I can't do that anymore, so I just won't walk. So the truth is there's a middle of the road, right? If you can continue to stay physically active, even if it's not those 15,000 steps, even if you can take 3,000 steps, that's better than 1,000 steps. So you can modulate how quickly you lose that by continuing to stay active. So a study that shows us a bit about that specificity, there was what's called a randomized control trial. So they assigned people to groups you didn't get to pick. They had one group that did high intensity treadmill, which means you walk faster than you want to walk. A group that did low intensity treadmill, which means you actually walk slower than you want to walk. And then a group that did stretching and resistance. So passive stretching led by a group leader, and then strength training. All groups met for the same amount of time, and all groups had a leader. They worked out in a group, so it was group exercise. Nobody was exercising alone. And what they saw from this study, everybody got better at walking speed. So everybody walked faster on the last day of class than they did on the first day of class. But the treadmill groups improved overall fitness. So cardiovascularly, they were more healthy at the end than they were at the beginning. That said, they saw no gains in strength. The group that did the stretching and the weightlifting, they saw gains in strength, but no cardiovascular or respiratory increases. So this is one of the studies that helps us to understand that exercise is beneficial, but it's specific to what you're gonna do. So along this line, we also think that if you really want to maximize all of those things, if what you're interested in is general health, coupling those things together, so rather than doing just high intensity treadmill, walking or jogging 3 times a week, maybe 2 days a week of being on a treadmill and 2 days of weightlifting or stretching would actually allow you to get some gains from both of those areas, right? So you'd be increasing strength while also helping to improve your overall fitness level. Does that make sense? So this is a question for you. Does anybody have things that motivate you to exercise? I'll speak for me. If somebody gave me the option of, you saw my baby, I have a small baby, 1-year-old, I need to get back to exercising, 100%. What doesn't motivate me is the idea of a treadmill. Treadmills are terrible. I would much rather swallow this than walk on a treadmill, hands down. Without question. So what motivates you? What makes exercise? There were a lot of hands that went up. Is it just that somebody told you exercise helps PD? Yes, sir.
You have to keep moving, so you don't freeze up on you. So you gotta keep that to keep me motivated.
So you know that you feel better when you're exercising. You keep moving and you don't get stiff, you don't freeze up.
I exercise 5 days a week in the morning. Plus, what I also do is water aerobics. It helps a lot.
Yeah, so different types of exercise help you to not get in kind of that monotonous groove, if you will. What else? What drives you to get there? Yes, ma'am.
I get to tap into a nice reservoir of endorphins. I feel really good when being active.
You feel really good afterwards?
Yeah, the endorphin thing is really great.
Totally. So that endorphin, if you exercise hard, when you get done and you just feel it. What else? Yes.
I'm in a women's aerobic dance class, and I just did a group after there's a group.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about that in just a second too. For a lot of people, it's this. It's that psychosocial piece. It's the fact that there's somebody there who's counting on me being there. I'm counting on them being there. And along with all the things that are great about exercise, I also just get to smile and talk about the grandkids or how terrible the weather is or my car or my husband or my kids or whatever it is. That piece is huge for a lot of people. One more? Yeah.
2 things. reduces stress so you sleep better, and strangely enough, it affects your movement of food through your system. It sort of works against constipation.
Completely and totally. So both of those things are excellent points. So we know that there are direct effects on sleep related to exercise. Yes, there's the logical, if you go out and you work hard, you're more tired if you sleep. There's also a neurochemical thing that happens. So when you get a lot of exercise, partially related to those endorphins that are released, partially related to some upregulation that we see in the middle front area of your brain, you just sleep better. And then the digestive piece is completely true as well. So exercise helps with constipation, and it helps to keep that digestive system working effectively. All of those things have been studied, and there are papers and a lot of research that can show you that they're true. Great. So to go directly to the community piece, I'm going to walk in front of this one more time. So to go directly to the community piece, it seems as though for a number of individuals, working out on your own isn't enough of a motivation to keep you working out. This obviously has nothing to do with Parkinson's disease, it has nothing to do with aging or anything else. Exercise is just more fun for many, many people if you have a group to exercise with. So some of the studies that have looked at this, Tai Chi, the pretty famous Tai Chi paper published a few years ago. So Tai Chi is something that, while you're actually practicing Tai Chi, there may not be a lot of conversation going on, but you still do it in a group. You come together, you exercise together, you learn together, you make mistakes together, and you get to have that psychosocial piece that comes with it. So specific to Tai Chi, we've seen increased balance, improvements in gait, and a decrease in the number of falls. And this was a relatively long study, so 24 weeks, but the results were pretty impressive. Boxing, and we have a boxing group here in town. So boxing is one of the exercises that is actually thought to put both the, if you will, respiratory piece and the muscle piece together. So when you're boxing, moving your arms around, moving around on your legs, your respiratory rate increases, your heart rate increases, and you're also stressing your musculoskeletal system. So boxing is one of the activities where we actually do see gains in both overall health improvements as well as muscle improvements. This study specifically, they saw improvements in gait speed, endurance, and a rating of quality of life, which was a survey that the individuals filled out. We talk a lot about gait. We know that as you start to lose balance, there are specific components of your gait that change. So when you have good balance and when you're feeling stable, you tend to take longer strides. You tend to walk with your feet narrower, closer together. So as you start to lose balance or become less steady, we see people take shorter steps and they walk with a wider, what we call base of support. So that's the reason that a lot of these studies look specifically at gait and try to measure those small components that, to a certain extent, you could look at that and say, well, I don't really care if I walk a little faster. But we know it actually helps to predict falls. Did I see anything?
How many times a week and for how long would you need to do boxing, for instance, or whatever exercise? I'm just thinking because you could think, oh yeah, if I walk for 5 minutes, that now I walk. You know, I'm using the extreme, but I'm just wondering how much time do you consider?
Totally. So that's a great question. So it depends on the type of exercise.
Can you just always repeat the question?
Oh, sure. So the question was, what is the magical formula for how long you need to do these things? So if you're going to box, how long do you need to box each week in order to see those positive benefits? Which is a great question. We call that dosing effects. And no different than with your medication. If you exercise for 60 minutes a week, that's a higher dose than 5 minutes a week. And there's a really funny phenomenon that we're learning about. People who are enrolled in exercise studies, again, say for example you're in a step count study and you're writing down how many steps you take each week. We now understand that there's a phenomenon where if you are recording your exercise, then you check it. I exercised today. It was only for 5 minutes, but I exercised. So now I'm going to watch 3 extra hours of TV tonight and have 1 extra brownie. It turns out it doesn't work that way. You don't just get to say, I exercised, I win, done. There are very let's say, fuzzy lines for each type of exercise that you're gonna do. The American College of Sports Medicine has laid out specific guidelines for exercise that tell us how many minutes of physical activity you should have each week. But those are really dependent upon the kind of exercise you're doing and how intense the exercise is. So the bad news is there isn't a great number. What we tend towards saying is at least 3 days of physical activity for at least an hour is sort of the minimum if you want to see things at least maintained. And then it goes up from there, and again, that's depending on the type of exercise you're doing and how intense it is. So I don't have a good answer is the true answer. But hopefully any program that you're getting involved with is trying to help you meet those numbers. So, for example, the Tango class that we run that for 2 hours per day, twice a week. That will not get you to your minimum exercise threshold, excuse me, but hopefully it should get you about halfway there. And finally, dance. So I've made reference to Tango a few times. As it turns out, a lot of people have looked at a lot of different types of dance. So there was a study in St. Louis, Missouri, where they looked at improvisational dance, which is, we're not even going to tell you what to do, you just move as you want to the music. We teach a Tango class here in town. To be very clear, on the list of things that I am also not a Tango instructor. And for those of you who've been in the class, there's a definitive reason why that's true. I've never fallen down, just for the record. But Tango dance, we picked very specifically, and I'll show you in a little bit here why that is. But dance is one of those things where you're up, you're moving, you're stepping. There is intention and focus put on your walking and gait. We know that one of the things with Parkinson's disease is that you tend to take shorter, smaller steps, and you don't tend to get your foot quite as high up off the ground. As it turns out, you can in fact overcome that if you focus on it. And so dance is one of those things that asks you to put intention into each step. Tango, for example, each step that we take, we ask you to make a very long stride. That's part of the dance. And so you're to focus on making that long and smooth step forward or backward as part of what we're doing. And so that's similar to perhaps what a physical therapist could ask you to do when you come to physical therapy. So just one of the studies, this was from the group that I worked with in St. Louis, we've seen reduction in freezing, increases in balance, again we go to gait speed, improvements in both forward and backward gait speed, and decreases in bradykinesia that are associated with dance. Yes, ma'am. Yep, so the question is, with the Tango class that we were just talking about, do you need to bring someone with you to the class? And we'll talk specifically about the Tango class in a little bit, but just to answer the question while we're here, you absolutely don't. So I work as part of the occupational therapy program, and it's actually a great benefit to my students that they get to volunteer to help out with Tango. And I'm not even using volunteer in quotes because I'm making them volunteer. They want to be there. They are interested in helping people. They are interested in learning about different types of aging-related things that are happening out there. It is a wonderful experience for them. And for those of you who have been there and met the students, it seems to be a great relationship in both directions. So my students get very wrapped up in your lives, and sometimes there are interactions both ways. So Christmas cards get exchanged, and when my students break up with their significant other, they get very kind words from their partners at Tango. We'll talk specifically how the Tango class works before we get done here tonight, but you absolutely do not. In fact, we welcome single individuals to come. I mean, you can certainly be married, but you can come as an individual to class. So, to go a bit to the question that was just asked, a very logical question would be, so what should I do? There's this person in front of me talking about exercise. My super logical question should be, what kind of exercise should I do and how often should I do it? Completely reasonable. So the last university that I worked at, we tried to answer that question. We compared Tango dancing to stretching and treadmill walking. And as I talked about before, we think a piece of all of this with regard to group exercise is that social aspect, right? So if I just have some friends, I'm looking forward to seeing them, that may in fact encourage me to get there. So we needed the balance for that. We actually had the people who were in the treadmill groups exercise in a group together. We had the people in the Tango group obviously dance together, and the stretching group came together and stretched all at the same time with the leaders. They exercised for the same amount of time each week, and they all exercised in the exact same place. The one variable that we hadn't considered when we started the study, but in the first week we did, was that the Tango class has music. So as some of you know, if you have a rhythm or an external pace of some sort, that sometimes helps you to move a little bit smoother. So we in fact made people in the treadmill group and the stretching group listen to Tango music all the time when they were with us. And if you'd like to see a group of people who genuinely hate Tango music, I can introduce you to 85 of them in St. Louis, Missouri. So we tried to compare the three so that we could come up with an answer to that question. You come to us and say, what type of exercise should I do? I can look at you and say, best bang for your buck is treadmill. So to back up for 1 second and talk about why Tango. Tango dancing is something that Dr. Gammon Earhart, who's in the physical therapy program at St. Louis, Washington University in St. Louis, has studied relatively extensively. So there is definitive evidence that says Tango dancing helps people with Parkinson's disease. Not in comparison to anything else, but just from the first day you come in, following 12 weeks or 8 weeks of Tango, we see positive benefits. We know that the music, the cueing part, as we just talked about, seems to help individuals with PD. So if you can get that, Tango has a very definitive beat, if you can think of Tango dancing. So you have that cueing mechanism. Again, part of Tango is long steps. So when you're Tango dancing, we ask you to take long steps. And when you turn, we ask you to take long steps laterally. And when you're walking backwards, we ask you to take long steps backwards. Ideally working on improving gait and balance by cueing those longer steps. We also know that when falls happen, not just for individuals with PD, but older individuals in general, they tend to happen when you take a couple backward steps. So if you think of reaching into the refrigerator to get something out, and you try to back out, and your heel catches the ground, or in small spaces such as bathrooms when you're turning. Tango specifically addresses both of those things. When you Tango dance, you turn and you walk backwards. That's true whether you are dancing the traditional male or female role. We also, to address that part, get rid of the male and female role in the studies that we've done. So we call it leader and follower, and everybody dances both the leader and the follower role, which means sometimes I'm dancing forward and telling my partner where to go, and sometimes I'm dancing backwards and my partner's telling me where to go. We also think that perhaps that has a bit of a cognitive effect. So we don't do this as much in the class here, but you can imagine if you've just learned one set of steps, for example, an ocho, right? So you're gonna do this and turn and come back and turn. So I just learned that in the female role, and now I have to try to do the male part. It's really hard. And I'm telling you that as a 37-year-old who should be able to pick it up fairly quickly. It's really hard to switch those roles back and forth. So we ask everyone to do both pieces. Tango is also improvisational. So we teach you a set of moves, but one of the first things that we learn in the first month of Tango is that you can't do it wrong. So if you're dancing around the room and you just get tired and need a second to not move, this is a perfectly acceptable Tango move. And when you're ready to go again, you go again. So it's fine to stop, it's fine to pause. So that improvisational piece where you can't be wrong, but at the same time, you have to decide what the next thing to occur is prior to it occurring. So that piece is particularly key for PD. And then the other part is, as we talked about, we actually partner everyone up with healthy, young, usually early 20 individuals. So for those individuals who know that they're at a risk for falls, we can put a gait belt on you. We can let your partner know that there's a fall risk there, and they can help you through that. Not that they're going to necessarily always be able to prevent you from falling, but they are trained spotters. So if you are in fact falling, they should be able to help you safely to the ground. And or in fact feel that you're starting to hesitate as that step is happening backwards and stop the dance and give you some support so that you don't fall. So that partner dancing piece also seems to help a lot to allow individuals who are less stable to stay active. So what did we do? Yes, sir.
I've acted in similar situations that are like if you in escorting the people back to the rest area. And we did not try to prevent the fall, we controlled the fall.
Yep, so our students actually learn as part of their curriculum in the occupational therapy program, physical therapy as well, that a lot of times the worst thing that you can do is try to catch someone who's falling. Because if you're falling backwards, exactly, and I'm gonna fall on top of you, which is not good for you either. Plus, we're both in a bad situation, then if you're hurt and I'm hurt, what are we gonna do? So sometimes the best thing that you can do is to help someone get down to the floor as safely as possible. So they have been trained in all of those things. We also address it when they're trained to help out with the dance class. You're in a posture where actually you're in a pretty good spot to help someone. But if they do start to fall, what do you do and how to safely help them? So that's an excellent point. So we divided folks up, again, either into the Tango dance group, the treadmill group, or the stretching group. They were in matched situations, so everybody exercised 3 times a week for 1 hour, and they did that for 12 weeks. We looked at them before they started, we looked at them when they were done, and then we asked them to come back 3 months later and look at them again. And at each of those first 2 time points, we collected both behavioral data, so we had people walk on a mat. We asked them questions about their symptoms. We took them through the UPDRS, that's this one. We had them do all of those things. And then we also had them do brain imaging before and after the exercise interventions, hoping that we could see, hopefully, differential activation within the brain due to the type of exercise that you're doing. So 119 people qualified to be in the study. There were 43 in the Tango, 41 in the treadmill, and 35 in the stretching. The numbers highlighted in red, so 91%, 78%, and 79% tell us how many people actually finished each of those programs. So 91% of the individuals enrolled in the Tango class saw it all the way through to the end. And then high 70s for the stretching and the treadmill groups. High 70s is still respectable, but 90% of the people staying in the class from beginning to end says that perhaps there's something about that partnered interaction that we had during Tango that keeps you coming back. And just to clarify, when we Tango dance, you're not set with your partner for the duration of time. We actually, during the class, probably rotate, 15 times during the class. So you rotate through and you dance with everyone in the room multiple times. What everyone is waiting for, data. So what does the data say? Good, bad, or otherwise, what we found was that everyone in every group got better at pretty much everything we looked at. So what do you say to that? Good, bad, or otherwise? The good news is everybody got better. Right? The bad news is, if you come and knock on my door right now and ask me treadmill walking, stretching, or tango dancing, which is the best one for me, everybody got better. That's it. So I still don't have a good answer to what is the best type of activity for people with Parkinson's disease. There are a couple more measures that we did. 6-minute walk is simply how far can you walk in 6 minutes back and forth in a hallway. The timed up and go is sitting in a chair, getting up and walking. Again, both of these things got better from the beginning to the end in all 3 groups, but none of the groups were different. This is the entire list of variables, all of which got better in all 3 groups. There were trends toward that second time point at the end of the interventions and then the follow-up. There were trends towards everybody returning close to their baseline. So nobody got better and then miraculously stayed better after they stopped exercising. But hang on. Similar to Madison in some ways, St. Louis also has a very active group of individuals with Parkinson's disease. So on average, the individuals enrolled in this study, before the first day that they walked in the door, were already exercising 4 hours a week. For those of you familiar with the IRB, that's the group of people who review all of the studies that we want to do at a university. We know that exercise helps, regardless of what it is that you have, regardless of if you're a healthy 37-year-old, exercise is good for you. No one is going to approve a study where we ask somebody, particularly somebody with a degenerative disease, to stop exercising. So we didn't ask them to stop anything that they were already doing. We asked them to enroll in our study and do the specific thing that we asked them to do. So there's obviously a huge bias there, right? These people are already, like many of you, already very active. We're adding to how active they are, and we're seeing things get slightly better. But very, very few people were at a point where they were currently not doing anything, and this was something brand new to them. And then another factor that I'm going to throw out there quick, because some of the studies that I'm working on, getting up and running right now, address this. When we looked at the demographics of the people who participated in our study, first of all, they were from areas of suburbs around the primary area and suburb area of St. Louis. We had 100% of the participants were in areas that were defined as urban. So not a single person was from a zip code that was defined as rural. Partially that's completely reasonable, right? Are you going to drive an hour to Tango dance for an hour, to drive home for an hour, 3 times a week? It's a lot to ask. But we're not doing a great job of getting things out to those people who are not close by, who don't have immediate access to the things that we're offering. And the second piece, even within those urban zip codes that we were looking at, overwhelmingly we had upper middle class, by demographic data, upper middle class zip codes that were enrolled in the study. So we're not doing a great job of bringing exercise or bringing these interventions to those people who can't afford to travel or who already don't have access to things like exercise. So we know that, and we're going to try to do better. So what do we know about, yes sir?
I noticed that in the exercise classes I'm in, that there are more women than men.
True.
And I don't know why. Because I noticed that more men than women get Parkinson's. Why? What's the reason for this?
So the question was, he's noticed that in the exercise classes that he is in, there are more women than men, but yet he also knows the statistic that more men than women have PD. So what is the answer? So one thing that we think we know is that men actually are less likely to exercise in groups. Men are more likely to say that they enjoy that time on the treadmill and want to exercise alone. So you're less likely to see a man in a group setting. Whatever that is, we won't go into here. But we also know that men are less likely to engage in physical activity-based classes. So that's a research topic for a different researcher, but it's a great question of how we can get men involved. I will say that 3 semesters ago, I guess, the Tango class here in Madison, we actually had more men than women, which is the first in my 6 years now of being involved with Tango that has ever happened. I think we had 4 men and 3 women. Or 4 men and 2 women that semester. So that was the first for me. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Tango. What do you have in those classes?
Yep, so the classes that we run are at UW Research Park over on the west side. So about by West Town Mall on Mineral Point Road there. Science track, yes. And we'll talk about that class specifically at the end as well. Yes, sir.
Perhaps some of the explanation of men participating in these exercise classes because they're not holding on.
Fair.
Other
I heard a nah, that wasn't me for the record. Very possibly. We also, as I addressed earlier, we also know that there's this phenomenon where if you're doing something, you tend to check exercise off the list and therefore don't need to engage in other. Not to say that mowing the lawn isn't a great physical activity, because it is, and I'm the lawnmower in my house, so. But it is. No. But there is perhaps something about doing those things and thusly checking exercise off the list and therefore not needing to go do those things that may in fact play a role as well. Whether or not the lawn mowing is the same physical activity as being on a treadmill for an hour, I don't know the measurement numbers on that, so yes.
I have neighbors, many neighbors who say, I want to come over and cut my grass, but they're riding lawnmowers and they take my plow, walk behind, and I go, but I need the exercise.
Absolutely, and you should encourage them to get rid of their rider as well. Just my bias, but. So we know that engagement matters. We know that being up and being physically active is simply better than not in almost every case. There are, of course, individuals who can't make that happen, but for the most part, for those people who are able to do so, being active is in fact better than being not active. And the greater intensity level that you can work at is typically better as that increases. So previous work has demonstrated the importance of participating. You know that old saying that showing up is more than half the battle, right? Same idea here. You can get up, if you can take the steps to get into the building, if you can do what they're asking you to do, that's a big part of the battle. And then beyond that, just doing it probably isn't enough. You gotta stick with it. Doing something for 8 weeks, checking the box, all that stuff's gonna go away once you stop. Yes, ma'am?
Just was wondering, since it seems like you're dividing exercise into three segments, I guess. Is there a study at all where all three things, 20 minutes on a treadmill, 20 minutes of stretching, and 20 minutes of dance, combined to see how that would benefit?
So there's nothing with those three particular things. We picked them because they are different to a certain extent. Stretching, in theory, you're not actually increasing your heart rate to any extent. Walking on a treadmill, you should be almost by definition doing that exact thing. In Tango, but on a treadmill, you're only walking straight ahead, the way we have it set up. In Tango, we're purposely having you do all of these extra things. So would we see a difference in balance with one and not the other, or gait speed with one and not the other? There have been some, although it's not that I'm familiar with an individual with Parkinson disease, there are definitively some studies where they've done things like endurance training and weight training together. And we know to a certain extent one borrows from the other. So if you're trying to train for a marathon, for example, and also simultaneously lifting weights, you will see increase in muscle mass, but you also won't get as fast. So you won't improve your respiratory and endurance values as quickly if you're also weight training. So we know that to a certain extent one steals from the other, but you also are seeing parallel benefits in both things.
I just thought, combining the benefits of all.
Yep. So one of the things that we're finding out from you, because in the end, the truth is that you're the experts, right? You're the people who are living these things every day. We try to come up with questions to answer, but you're the experts. That people are doing that on their own, right? So people are taking boxing and tango dancing. You don't have to pick one, unless the times are obviously mutually exclusive. But you don't have to be a boxer. You can do whatever you want. You can cross-train, if you will. And it seems like that is beneficial to people, and it also decreases your burnout rate. So just doing the same thing every week, sometimes didn't raise their hand. First finding out why, and then specifically trying to address that group of people. So group one, whether you have PD or not, there is a group of people that if we use the E word, they're not doing it. If I tell you it's exercise, not interested. So for that group of people, we try to appeal to your, how can I be active without the E word nuances?
Fun.
Fun is exactly the answer. So it's play. right? In the end, exercise should be play, it should be fun, it should be something that's engaging to you. So what can we do to go there? And what we've come up with is glassblowing. Let's see if we can make it. So this is the glassblowing, the director of the glassblowing program at UW-Madison. So this is just one of the seated things that you do. Glassblowing focuses on fine motor and it focuses on gross motor. So big movements, you have to pick up this pipe, which I think weighs 5 pounds. You load glass on the end of it, which is heavy. You carry it around the shop. You sit down and then you do this back and forth motion. So with your left hand, you're controlling the pipe. And with your right hand, you're wielding a tool. You're shaping the glass in some way, shape, or form. That's the way it looks if you're really good at it. This is one of my students in our pilot test. That's the way you look if you're not so good at it and you're just learning to do it. So you can see the beautifully nuanced thing that the art professor did with her left hand is gone. She's doing what's called motor freezing. So she's freezing her wrist, she's freezing her elbow, and she's sawing like this. And that's how she gets that to move. But it addresses things that we know are issues with PD. It addresses fine motor movement, it addresses gross motor movement. There's a very important vocal component. You're moving around the shop with glass on the end of a pipe that is very hot and very dangerous. You are needing to communicate with the instructor as well as, similar to Tango, it's a partnered activity. So the whole time you're doing this, you are partnered with typically one of our OT students who has been trained in glassblowing so that they know what areas are safe, what areas are not safe, and they can help you move around the shop. We are working on getting this up and running, and hopefully we'll have the first cohort starting either in the fall or spring of next year. The idea with this, and plug your ears if you are currently not enrolled in any type of exercise, the idea with this is that it's totally not exercise. For sure it's not. Except it is. It's actually a really strenuous task. You take a lot of steps. It requires a lot of cognitive focus. Again, the vocal component is big, gross motor, fine motor. There's a lot of physical activity that's involved with this task. So we put through a group of occupational therapy students just to look at what these data would look like as you went through the class. And we see improvements in range of motion. So wrist angles, elbow angles get better as you go through the class. So you learn to move bigger because that's the nature of the class. If you're not moving large, if you're not doing the motion to their full extent, either the glass falls off the end of the pipe or you don't get the result you're looking for. So you're constantly coached to make those things bigger, to make them bend and move in the way you want them to. And this is something called motor learning. So we know from the beginning of the study to the end of the study, the way in which our students move changed. So group 2, again, this is how to bring exercise to people who right now aren't exercising. So group 2 are those individuals who don't have access to exercise or don't have ready access to exercise. A lot of this has to do with money to a certain extent. So we're socioeconomic individuals, both in urban and rural environments. For those of you who listen to NPR on the way here, they actually were talking about exactly this. Turns out that urban and rural communities may be fairly similar, much more so than we thought. Having lived in both of them, I can tell you that they are. People don't have access. They don't have access to as many medical individuals. They don't have access to as many exercise type of things. They just don't have access. And again, even if you have a vehicle, driving an hour to participate in something that takes an hour to drive an hour home is way too much to ask, particularly, again, if you have PD. So what can we do to help these individuals? We're going to go to them. We're going to come to you. So, again, this is the pilot before I actually even started here. We put a bike in my mother-in-law's house. In the beginning, we just bought her a bike because it seemed like a great idea. And we'll talk about why cycling in just a minute. Biking is awesome. Who wouldn't want to do that? And she loved it for 3 weeks. And then it became a great place to stack the laundry. Specifically right here is a great place for a laundry basket. Fits perfect. But when that didn't work, we set up 3 times weekly phone call or Skype calls with her. So this is a mom and computer interface. So we Skype with her. We Skype with her 3 times a week. We Skype with her 3 times a week, every week. In 2 years of doing this, she actually had to stop 2 months ago because she had hip replacement. But in 2 years, she missed, I believe, 3 times. One time was when I gave birth to my first child. One time was when I was at a doctor's appointment to find out I was pregnant with my second child. And one time was when I was presenting data in LA and I mixed up the time change. She missed 3 times because of me. She doesn't miss. She shows up every week. She shows up every day. And we talk about the weather, we talk about grandkids, we talk about her husband when he's not in the room, we talk about whatever it may be, but it matters to her, and she's there. So we are upping this study currently to take cycles to individuals who can't come to us, to rural Wisconsin, to the east side of Milwaukee, to those people who otherwise don't have access to the things that many of you have access to.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am. Sir.
the other problem is, we live in Waterloo, I do not look forward to the prospect of driving to the west side of Madison.
Yep. That's what we want to help. We want to help those who just aren't going to be able to get here.
I'm sure there's a lot of people in potential here that find themselves in a similar boat.
Yep. And you are exactly the type of individuals who we will be looking for. So we want to come to you, we will bring that bike to your house, we will help you find a place for it, we will get it set up. For those of you who live in rural areas and don't have access to the internet, we bring the internet to you. There's something called a MiFi device that we set up in your house. It costs you nothing. And that device allows us to get that TV screen up and running, the Skype, so that we can talk to you. The computer is run on a platform that allows us to basically, only with your permission, but when you give us permission, we can run the computer. So when it does those things that computers do that are frustrating and it stops working, we can actually access your computer from here and help it to do whatever it needs to do, so that you don't have to worry about the technology end. So we try to take care of all of those things, and what we ask you to do is bike with us. We have a bike in the lab. It gets a little bit uncomfortable when we're sitting at our desk just eating Cheetos while you're biking. So we have bikes in our lab. Either myself or my students will bike along with you. And so we are there with you, and we will bike right alongside. Yes, ma'am.
How long did they bike?
So Alice, my mother-in-law, she started with 5 minutes because that's all she could do. The goal is to get you up to at least a half hour, 3 times a week. And she is at that now, or was before hip surgery, so.
And what, how do you measure her improvement, by the time that she does it, or?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, how do we measure improvement? And similar to the other studies, we have a battery of things that we test. So we do that UPDRS assessment that you do sometimes with your neurologist. We do that. We look at your walking speed. We look at your balance with a balance test. And then we do some occupational therapy focused things. So if we can get you to Madison for one day, show you in a second, we actually have a test kitchen. So we have you make muffins and soup and cut an apple. And we look at how you move in that space. We also have a gait mat so that I can look at how long those strides are and how wide your steps are. So we look at all of those variables as well as things like endurance and things like that. And just to address, so why cycling? Have people seen this gentleman? Oops. So we picked cycling for a few reasons, but so this gentleman is freezing relatively severely. The woman in the hall is cueing him to get him out of the freeze by putting her foot in front of him, and he's stepping over it. So he's pretty severely affected by PD. We also typically discourage letting people fall all over the floor, but. So he's actively trying to turn right now and freezing. Here's the second video. He also will not try this at home. That's him on the bike. Same man, same day. He was just in the hallway, he's now on the bike. I have no earthly idea as a researcher what would make you think that that's a good idea. My guess is he knew how to do this before he got there. But if you look when he turns, as you know, turning with Parkinson's disease is sometimes hard because everything turns in a line. When he turns that corner, he turns his head and then turns the bike with no problem. And then this is my favorite part. Hang on. No uh-oh. Boop. And then if you watch, he goes right back to Sure. So he's unable to locomote, but he is able to make the bike work. There's something called the closed chain activity. Cycling is that. So when one foot is moving in one direction, the other foot is moving in the other, and they're paired together. So even people who are fairly affected with PD can often still cycle. We also use what's called a recumbent bike, so you don't have to step up over a big bike seat or that middle post that you have on a bike. The recumbent bike has this much clearance in the middle, so it's just simply this nice big cushy seat. And then again, we control the technology. So then group three is many of you, if you're ready to go. There's a list out there of things that you can actively be taking part in the Madison area. We talked a little bit about Tango. My Tango instructor is Joe Yang. This is his, if you want to just call up Joe and get some Tango lessons going, he would certainly do that for you. We will start a Tango class again in the fall when my students are back. I believe October 1st is what we have down as a start date. Again, that's at UW Research Park. I'll show you a picture from there in just a minute. And then we do have lots of research options, some of which I've shown here will hopefully be up and running soon. There are other research activities happening at UW and in Milwaukee currently, which definitely can get you involved in movement-based activities. So for those of you interested in what our Tango class looks like, so this gentleman is our instructor, and he's specifically guiding each individual through what to do. And then Alicia is hopefully a future PhD and OT student. Lisa's a first year student, and I can't see who that is, but I'm sure she's an OT student too. So it's our students matched up with individuals with PD. You're welcome to bring your partner if you so desire. You're welcome to bring your sister, brother, cousin, whoever it may be. If you bring someone, we certainly are happy to let the two of you just dance together. Otherwise, you dance with us. Sweaty palms and all. We will introduce you to everybody. We all wear name tags, so you don't have that awkward moment of forgetting the name of the person you're dancing with. But it's just generally fun. There's no research involved with it currently. As long as we can, at least through the fall, we run it for free. So it's just the first group of, the numbers were pretty low last semester, but we have capped it previously at 12, just so that it's a manageable group, and just have fun. So if you're interested in that, you have my contact information, and we can certainly get you enrolled. If you don't live in Madison, your local APDA is usually a great outreach point. Also, if you're on your way into your neurologist or physician's office, they can often help you get set up with places to go. Local community centers often also have specific groups. I know a lot of times the stuff that you see posted on the wall is pretty general, but they do sometimes have PD-specific groups or PD-specific support groups that can help you find exercise things in your area. So now what? Before you do any of these things, obviously, you need to touch base with your doctor. There are certainly reasons why exercise doesn't work for some people, and those reasons are very valid and should be paid attention to. Once again, on the list of things that I am not, I'm not someone who can just tell you that it's a good idea for you to exercise. You should absolutely consult with your physician and likely your movement disorder specialist to make sure that exercise is a good idea for you, and specifically whatever type of exercise you're interested in is a good idea for you. I think personally that the most important thing is finding that thing that does it for you. Again, I would rather not walk on a treadmill ever, but I will get in the pool and swim for hours if you will let me. I will play volleyball, softball, whatever thing you can do in a team. If you want to go out and shoot some hoops right now, I'm all for it. If you want to run around with a 3-year-old, you bet. Find the thing that keeps you interested, find the thing that makes you smile, find the thing that's play, and make it happen. And then, as long as you can, go and don't stop. And for those of you who've been there before, once you stop, sometimes the hardest thing is getting up and getting it going again. So as long as you are physically able to do so, find something that is at your level and just keep going. The last thing I just want to talk about very quickly, completely off of the parallel line that we've been walking on. This is a piece of my lab. So I think one of the important things in science that we maybe haven't done a great job thus far, we talked about things like length of your stride and speed of your walking and balance. We don't necessarily do a great job of asking how much it just matters to you every day. So you walk faster, cool. But can you actually get up in the morning, go to your kitchen and do that thing that you want to do, make eggs because that's what you want to do. So in my lab, if you come in as part of a study, this floor is instrumented so I can see everywhere that you walk. There are 6 cameras set up so I can see how you reach, how you do things. And we ask you to do some very specific tasks. You make 6 muffins, you cook condensed soup, and you core and peel an apple and cut it into 8 pieces. Which means we eat a lot of apple soup and muffins in my lab. But I think that this is an important part as well, so finding out what matters to you and seeing if we can affect those activities of everyday life. This is the OT piece into the research. So as part, before you get there and you're surprised by it, as part of the research, we ask you to do this. And then we look at how those things change over time. So can glassblowing for 8 weeks change the way that you make muffins in the kitchen? As crazy as that sounds, that's part of what we're looking at. So the take-home points, exercise is beneficial to people with PD. I think we're well past understanding that that's a pretty sizable and reproducible finding at this point in time. But it's not universally accessible to everyone, and it's also not universally appealing to everyone. So finding those things that you can get to, and that are what you want to do, is a big piece of the puzzle. We know that being in a group, finding your friends and getting them to do the things that you're interested in may in fact make it easier and easier to stick with and more fun. We know that if you take the E word out, there may be ways to do exercise to stay physically active without calling it exercise. Mowing the lawn may be a great example of that. Glassblowing may be a great example of that. But getting you up and moving and getting you engaged is an important piece. And then once again, we're going to try harder to get to those people who we haven't done a great deal of getting to so far. Wherever you're at, we're going to try to get to you. So that's what I've got is the group of people that have helped me along the way to get some of the data that you saw today and get some of the projects up and running that we've got up and running. And I'm happy to take questions until the lights go out. One way or the other. Yes, sir.